Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is the 100% Clean Energy States and the 100% Clean Energy Collaborative. This webinar is being presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance, also known as CESA, and we have some excellent guest speakers with us today from the California Energy Commission and NYSERDA. Before I pass it over to them and to our host for the webinar, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. All of our attendees are in listen-only mode. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of the webinar. You can call in using your telephone or your computer mic and speakers. If you'd like to minimize the webinar console so that you can view its full screen, you can click on the orange arrow that you see circled there. You can also click on that arrow to expand the webinar console. And one of the things that we'd like to direct your attention to on the webinar console is the questions box. So we do encourage you to type your questions and comments in and submit them there throughout the webinar. On many of our webinars, we do a Q&A at the end. In this webinar, we're doing Q&As directly after each of our presentations. So don't wait until the very end to type your questions in. Please type them in as you think of them, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. And a final note, this webinar is being recorded. We will send you an email with a copy of the webinar recording and a PDF of the slides within 1 or 2 days. And we'll also be posting those materials on our website at cesa.org/webinars. So with that, I will turn it over to our host for today's webinar, Warren Leon. Warren is the Executive Director of the Clean Energy States Alliance, and he is going to introduce our guest speakers and tell you more about our webinar today.
Hey, thanks very much, Samantha. First, I want to note that this webinar is being brought to you by the Clean Energy States Alliance. We're a national membership organization composed of public entities from across the country, most all of them state agencies, and we have representatives in 19 different states. You can see our members up here on the screen. We engage in a variety of activities to help our members and to promote clean energy across the country. If we could go to the next slide, I want to start talking about what we're here for today. The adoption by an increasing number of states of 100% clean energy goals for the electricity sector has likely been the most important positive policy development related to climate change in this country over the past few years. Today's webinar will look at 100% clean energy from the perspective of two leading states, California and New York. There will then be a presentation on the general state trend towards 100% clean energy and how the 100% Clean Energy Collaborative will serve those states. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and he's going to speak. We'll then have questions for him. I will then introduce our second speaker, and she'll speak, and we'll have questions for her. And then I'm going to give a presentation. So let me turn to our first speaker, who's David Hochschild. He was appointed chair of the California Energy Commissioner and California Energy Commission by Governor Gavin Newsom in February 2019. His career has spanned public service, environmental advocacy, and the private sector. He got involved with solar energy in 2001 as a special assistant to San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown, where he launched an $100 million initiative to install solar on public buildings. He co-founded the Vote Solar Initiative. He was executive director of a national consortium of leading solar manufacturers. He worked at solar company Solaria, and he was a commissioner at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. Let me turn it over to David Hochschild.
Well, thank you, Warren, for that generous eulogy and for putting this webinar together, and also thanks and congratulations to my fellow panelists, Alicia, for all the good work NYSERDA is doing. And let me just say, you know, we're all from different states in this journey to a clean energy future, but we're all on the same team. And I really think that the leadership that happens at the states today, at the state level, that is really the cutting edge, and that's really what's going to make change happen in this country and what's going to make change happen around the world. So in California, we adopted our 100% clean energy mandate about a year and a half ago, and it's been an incredible momentum since then, which I want to share with you, and then happy to get to questions. So let's go to the next slide. So what the law in California requires is that our current RPS, which excludes large hydro, but includes wind and solar thermal and solar PV and geothermal and biomass, that gets extended under the current rules to 60% by 2030. And then between 2030 and 2045, we have to get to 100% clean energy. And that definition of clean energy is a process we're going through refining, but basically, resources like large hydro are likely to count towards that. So let's go next slide. Okay, so a snapshot of where we are today. So it's 2020. We're at 63% carbon-free electricity for retail sales in California today. 36% is from what I described conventional renewables, and you can see on the right there, solar is the largest resource of those, and wind is next largest. Then we have geothermal, biomass, and small hydro. Last year, we hit a very important milestone of 1 million solar roofs in California, and in addition to that, the Energy Commission created a new rule requiring solar on every new home. In California, that went into effect January 1st. So we've been building about 100 to 120,000 new homes a year, and now that's standard for new construction. And so in addition to those conventional renewables, we have 17% large hydro and one remaining nuclear plant, Diablo Canyon, that is scheduled to go down in about 5 years. So that's where we are today, and the balance of that 37% is principally natural gas. Let's go to the next slide. So this has been a remarkable year and a half really. Hawaii gets great credit for leading the whole country in 2015 by adopting the very first 100% clean energy standard, and then we did ours in 2018, went into effect January 1, 2019, and in the intervening time since then, we've had all these states adopt 100% clean energy mandates, with many more on the way, and there's now about 30% of the population of the United States living in a state that has committed to go to 100% clean energy. Now, these are not including, this map doesn't show all the other RPS standards, but there's, of course, roughly 30 RPSs around the country where there's some mandate to get to some target. And I think we're going to see a lot more momentum toward that goal in the years to come. One of the reasons I am absolutely confident we are going to get to 100% and that this is going to be the new reality is what's happening in cost. So just by way of example, I got into the solar industry and the solar energy sector in 2000 when the price of utility scale solar project was 50 cents a kilowatt hour. Last year, we had the first utility scale solar project in California come in at under 2 cents a kilowatt hour, and we're not done with cost reduction. Very important point to note for clean energy resources like wind and solar and energy storage. There's still a lot more cost reductions still to come. I visited a wind plant in Oklahoma last year, and they're down to 1.3 cents a kilowatt hour, and still more innovation coming. So I'm very bullish on what the future holds for clean energy. And I think in this moment that we're in, all the challenges presented by the current economic crisis, there's always opportunity inside the crisis. I really believe that. And I think that this seed planting you're seeing through policy is actually not just a climate and clean energy strategy, but also an economic recovery strategy. Okay, next slide. So I mentioned a little bit about the cost. The point I want to draw your attention to is you can see both tracking solar PV and wind on land are today less than combined cycle natural gas in California. So solar PV is really the single cheapest electric generation resource that we have available. And then the other renewables that we talked about, small hydro and geothermal, offshore wind, distributed solar, biomass, et cetera, they're all cheaper than gas peakers. So it's really being driven, and accelerated by what we're seeing in cost. I want to also draw your attention to offshore wind. This is a resource I believe also has a very bright future. The entire global offshore wind industry is moving to a 12 megawatt platform. So by comparison, most of the wind turbines you see around the country are roughly 2 megawatt turbines, 2.5 megawatts. So a 12 megawatt turbine, just for context, one rotation of the turbine, which takes 4 seconds, it's 15 RPM. One rotation of the turbine powers a house for a day. So that's the scale that resource is getting to. And for us in California, it's especially valuable because offshore wind is highly, highly complementary to solar. So the production of offshore wind is up in the morning, goes down the middle of the day, and then comes up in the afternoon, evening, right when we need it. The solar resources is going down. And the wind resource is significantly better actually than wind on land. So wind for us in California on land is typically 35% capacity factor. Offshore, the wind resource is closer to 55, 60%. So that's something we're putting research and development investment money into right now, and we believe that has a very bright future both in California and around the world. Okay, next slide. So we are implementing this policy in close collaboration with two other sister agencies, the Public Utilities Commission and the Air Resources Board. We've been doing the workshops and stakeholder input we've been getting from all over the state, and we'll produce at the end of this year the first SB 100 report. We're going to be doing a bunch of modeling with different scenarios, different levels of electrification that will look out at the landscape ahead and costs and so forth. Let me touch briefly on electrification, because what is happening in concert with this rapid expansion of clean energy that we're seeing on the grid in California is that the reach of the electric grid itself is rapidly expanding. So we have about 700,000 electric vehicles on the road today in California. Our governor drives an electric car. This is really a very bright spot in our economy. We have 17 electric vehicle manufacturing operations in California, including 2 electric bus manufacturers. And we're also seeing momentum in things like rail. We're converting the diesel line from San Francisco to Silicon Valley is being electrified now. That'll be done next year. We're building high-speed rail. We're also seeing a trend towards all electric new homes with no gas lines, where water heating and other services are provided just with clean electricity. And this is good news, not just for emissions reduction, but actually all this electrification gives more tools to the electric grid operators and actually helps contribute to grid stability and grid reliability. And so that's a really exciting development for us. And, a lot of the innovation money that's coming in, so we get about 53% of U.S. clean tech venture capital comes into California, and the lion's share of that is going to innovation that involves the electric grid in some fashion, whether it's energy storage or electric scooters, electric vehicles of all sorts, or technologies that help manipulate demand to better support reliability. A huge amount of innovation happening now around the electric grid. And so I think I'll stop there, and happy to take any questions.
Hey, thanks very much, David. There's a good overview of what's going on in California. There are a number of questions that came in, and quite a few of them have to do with technology. And one question is, what technologies are included or aren't included in California's definition of carbon-free electricity, or has that not yet been determined?
So the final determination has not yet been made. We will be, carbon-free means carbon-free. So that's a baseline, but that is the process we're going through now to come to agreement on exactly, for example, for a long time there's been opposition to including large hydro in the renewable portfolio standard because people didn't want to encourage more rivers to be dammed up, right? That's one of the resources that I think is likely to be included. There are many other debates and discussions about other technologies, and that is the decision that the agencies will be making over time and as we evaluate comprehensively. But the baseline obviously is at zero carbon. I think what you're seeing just generally from a cost perspective is a very rapid reduction of renewable resources and energy storage, which is why I think the foundational technologies will be wind and solar, but you build in many other resources around that.
Good. Well, there are quite a few other questions that you sort of partially answered in your answer just now, but several people asked if you could say anything about the future prospects for either geothermal, fuel cells, or nuclear power within California's goal.
Yeah, so let me start with geothermal power. So we have about 2.5 gigawatts of geothermal power plants in California. One thing that we're going to be approving this week is another $10 million for projects that relate to geothermal that involve lithium recovery. So I see lithium as sort of the oil of the clean energy future. Half the cost of an electric vehicle is the battery pack, and lithium ion has been the dominant technology. And so we have a big lithium resource in California, and we have a whole vision which is called Lithium Valley, which is sort of a Silicon Valley for Southern California, built around this lithium resource. And that will provide some additional revenue for the geothermal power plants, which are typically more costly. While they have the benefit of running 24/7, unlike solar and wind, they do cost more. And so the additional revenue from lithium recovery can help us do more geothermal power. So I'm excited about that opportunity. With respect to fuel cells, I would say the niche for fuel cells is very likely heavy-duty trucking. With passenger vehicles, 99% of our fleet, I mentioned there's 700,000 zero-emission vehicles, passenger vehicles in California, so 99% of that is electric. Only 1% is fuel cell. So I think the market is moving very much towards electric vehicles for the passenger space. That's where most of the investment is going from the auto manufacturers. But the niche, we still fund about $20 million a year for fuel cell charging infrastructure, and that is, I think, predominantly the growth is going to be in the heavy-duty space there. And with respect to nuclear, we built 5 nuclear plants in California. 4 have been decommissioned. The last will be decommissioned in 2025. I think it's going to be very hard for nuclear to compete economically against where the price is of renewables.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I have to apologize to the many people who wrote additional questions, but we have a jam-packed webinar today, and I want to move on to our second speaker. We've heard from one of the clear leading states when it comes to clean energy and 100% goals. We've heard from California. We want to hear from New York now. And our speaker is going to be Alicia Barton, who's president and CEO of the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, which is affectionately known as NYSERDA. It's a public benefit corporation that advances innovative energy solutions to improve New York State's economy and environment. She joined NYSERDA in 2017, and Alicia oversees all aspects of its clean energy and climate initiatives. Alicia Barton has held numerous public and private sector leadership roles advancing clean energy projects and companies She's served in leading organizations, including law firm Foley Hoag, Sun Edison, and the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. Let me turn it over to Alicia Barton.
Hi, good afternoon. Warren, can you hear me okay?
Yep. We need
Okay.
to, there are your slides. Good.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for joining us on the webinar. It's really a pleasure to be here with you, Warren, and thank you to CESA for your leadership in spurring this 100% clean energy collaborative. As David said a moment ago, we are all on the same team, and really racing together to do something that is critical to secure our long-term economic, environmental, and public health stability, which of course looms very large in the light of the current, the backdrop of the current pandemic and all the challenges we're facing. So, this is a moment when this conversation means more than ever, I think. So the leadership of CESA and convening like-minded states to work together on these efforts is critically important. And of course, it's always a pleasure to work with our colleagues in California, and particularly you, David. Thank you for your ongoing and steadfast leadership on these issues. It's been a pleasure working with you. We, in New York have been really navigating a difficult time, as the entire country is, although, as you know, I think everyone knows New York has been particularly hard hit by the COVID-19 crisis. So we have been, doing a number of things to work through and respond to that. But as much as Governor Cuomo, I think, has been seen nationally as a leader in helping the country think about the ways to address the COVID-19 crisis, it's extraordinary to say that throughout all of this, he has continued to put climate and clean energy at the top of his agenda. And we are looking ahead, to a time when we do believe that that clean energy and long-term market signals, long-term commitments like commitments to 100% clean electricity will help spur the types of economic activity that will help us build back stronger and cleaner than ever. So that is something that we are also eager to partner with other states on, and welcome companies and policymakers and stakeholders of all types to work with us hand in hand to make sure that we can achieve that. Next slide, please. So I want to, start by summarizing essentially the commitment to 100% clean electricity that New York has put in place. David ran through some of the timeline for California. New York followed on California's leadership under SB 100 when in late 2019, Governor Cuomo introduced his Green New Deal, and as part of his legislative proposals in early 2019, excuse me, I should have said late 2018 when he proposed his Green New Deal, and then early 2019 followed that with introducing a set of legislative proposals that ultimately became embodied in the landmark law that was passed and signed by the governor last summer, New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which the governor signed in July of last year. And, what you see on the slide is really a summary of the major provisions of that law. It's extremely aggressive in all the ways that David just spoke about, and but of course is tailored, of course, to specifically the goals that we have in New York, which would it does set into law a requirement to reduce total emissions 85% below 1990 levels by 2050, and with a goal of achieving net zero emissions economy-wide as well, which is going to be a significant commitment. And I'll come back to how we're thinking about the economy-wide aspects. There's a nearer term goal of 40% reduction in emissions by 2030. And then, to the topic of this conversation, a requirement for 100% zero emissions electricity by 2040, which is a very aggressive goal, but one that we do believe is achievable and feasible, really for a lot of the reasons that David just walked us through around cost declines and really the march of renewable energy that has happened far faster than most experts predicted. Below that 100% commitment, the law actually does lay out a bit of a roadmap for how New York intends to achieve that. And again, that's based off the blueprint that Governor Cuomo introduced, and that my agency helped develop in order to, again, send those long-term market signals for investment and to set us on a path now to hitting some of these goals. So working back from the 2040 commitment to 100% zero emissions electricity, there's a commitment to 70% renewable electricity by 2030. I know there were a number of questions in the last presentation about what qualifies and whether it's been determined. Similar to California, the answer for New York is that the law sets these targets and does contain some definitions, some of which are prescriptive, others are perhaps a little more open-ended, but it also directs the Public Service Commission in New York, the PSC, to undertake a proceeding to adopt the requirements of the law to achieve the 70% renewable energy electricity target, as well as the 100% zero carbon electricity target. So that's something that we have ahead of us, is for the Public Service Commission to take up those specific questions about the role of various resources, including some of the ones that were discussed already, like large hydro and nuclear energy and the like. So that's something that we currently anticipate will kick off sometime in the months ahead. And of course, that'll be a public proceeding with opportunity for input and comment. What will be established through that proceeding, of course, though, is the provisions of the law, which for certain resources are prescriptive, including a nation-leading commitment to 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. And, I certainly echo David's comments about the promise of offshore wind. This has been a major priority for New York. We have set this large target because as we look at the needs for our state, it's pretty clear that offshore wind is a great match. It's located and proximate to our state's load, which is downstate in the New York City and Long Island area. And whereas upstate we have tremendous potential for land-based wind, hydro, and utility scale and distributed solar, the transmission constraints and the general constrained geography make offshore wind, which can interconnect directly into those large load centers in New York and Long Island, a very attractive opportunity, not to mention, again, the rapid cost declines that we anticipated to occur in the years ahead as offshore wind begins to scale, just as it has already begun to do in Europe. And as David noted, the turbine sizes are getting larger, and we believe this is going to be really the single largest new resource to add to our mix in New York State as we look forward. So that's a clear priority, and one that we have not waited to get started on. Last year, NYSERDA announced our first projects and the results of our first procurement of offshore wind. We awarded contracts to 2 projects of nearly 1,700 megawatts, and excitingly, these are not only expected to deliver significant amount of new offshore wind and kick us off in a very strong start towards that 9,000 megawatt goal, but also deliver $3.2 billion in private investment, more than 1,600 good paying jobs. And the governor announced earlier this year, and the Public Service Commission has already authorized a subsequent procurement for offshore wind, which we are working on as we speak. So that is something that again holds a lot of promise, and we believe will have tremendous impact on our state, both on our electric grid and on our economy, as well as we look to create thousands of new good-paying jobs in the offshore wind sector. Distributed solar is another major component called out in the law, and I think one one reason amongst many for that is that, you know, distributed solar is ready now, and we are rapidly increasing the amount of installed solar capacity we have in our state. We certainly are, you know, far behind California, who are way ahead of virtually everyone on that front, but we have been steadily increasing our installed capacity and crossed the milestone of 2,000 megawatts installed last year, which was very exciting, and we are you know, continuing to make those investments. 3,000 megawatts of energy storage. There's also an energy efficiency target. So as you can see, taking as a whole, there is a pretty good sense of what we think it will take to hit that 100% zero electricity target, zero carbon electricity target. Next slide, please. One critically important factor to our success in being able to achieve that target is getting the sites, is getting projects actually permitted and built. And we know that that's difficult anywhere, and it has also proven to be difficult in New York. And so in order to recognize the urgency of achieving the 70% renewable energy target by 2030, this year, really in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, the New York State Legislature and the governor came together to agree on the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act. This is a brand new law that will do a number of things, including establishing a new Office of Renewable Energy siting at the New York Department of State. We believe this is the first office solely dedicated to permitting and siting of renewable energy projects in the US. There's a lot of details in this law, more than I have time to go through in this presentation, but I think it's incredibly important to recognize that, again, we're not in New York focused just on setting the targets, but really putting all the pieces in place that we need in order to actually achieve the targets. And we believe this law is a significant step forward in that respect. It also addresses transmission and also charges my agency with NYSERDA with focusing on accelerating development of projects on landfills, brownfields, and previously developed industrial sites. Next slide, please. So, you know, this is really just wrapping up because I know we're on a very short timeline for this webinar, but just to reiterate where we started at the beginning, you know, New York is incredibly excited and pleased to partner with other states on all of these efforts, and think it's incredibly helpful to have convenings like this in order to compare notes and discuss the opportunities and challenges. I did want to also mention, just on the topic of offshore wind and working nationally, NYSERDA helped along with DOE and some other states create the National Offshore Wind Research and Development Consortium, which we think is a great example of states and the federal government and the public and private sector coming together to accelerate renewable energy innovation. And in that case, with a laser-like focus on decreasing the levelized cost of installed offshore wind energy. So, you know, we welcome that type of partnership, and for those of you that may be on the webinar that haven't worked with NYSERDA before, we do hope that you will look at the opportunities in New York and the opportunities to work with NYSERDA on all of our programs. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Warren, for the Q&A.
Hey, thanks very much. It was really good. You know, it's clear New York is playing a real leadership role in this regard, and we've got a range of questions. One is, how are you thinking about ensuring that low-income residents and under-resourced communities benefit as you move towards clean energy?
Well, that's a great question, and that is a central part of the commitments, sort of beyond the commitment to 100% clean electric grid in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. So that act sets a floor that 35% of state spending on climate and clean energy be dedicated to benefiting disadvantaged communities. And, we do have some work to figure out exactly what that means, but it certainly puts a clear focus on that issue. And what we've done at NYSERDA is begin to try to incorporate that into all of our programmatic initiatives, for example, for distributed solar and hitting that 6 gigawatt target that I spoke about. We filed a petition late last year with a public service commission that included essentially a 20-fold increase in our proposed budget for spending on access to solar energy for low and moderate income New Yorkers. That's just one example. It's something that is going to take a lot of careful consideration and thought, but we strongly agree, and the law recognizes and the governor recognizes that any successful clean energy transition has to put that issue front and center. And we do need everyone's best ideas about how to ensure that we can achieve the promise. There certainly are a number of other initiatives, probably more than we have time to go into. But for example, we've specifically targeted our energy storage program at helping spur development of clean storage projects that might replace dirtier peaking facilities, particularly in the downstate area, again, where a lot of those facilities are located. So those are just a couple examples.
Great, thank you. You talked about the energy storage 3,000 megawatt goal. Is that goal strictly for utility scale storage, or does it also include distributed storage? And is that goal strictly for batteries, or does it also include other technologies?
Oh, great questions. It is not strictly for utility scale. It really came out of a white paper that NYSERDA and our colleagues at the Department of Public Service put together, the New York Energy Storage Roadmap. That roadmap came out in 2018, and so in some sense it's actually already outdated. And what you see is an interconnection queue for energy storage projects at the New York ISO today that is far in excess. I think it's more than double the 2030 goal of 3,000 megawatts. So we've seen an extraordinary response to that. But again, that really was intended to apply to behind the meter, including, for example, we do have a market for residential paired PV and storage, particularly on Long Island, where NYSERDA is running a program, other behind the meter, distributed scale and bulk scale storage projects. Right now, that target does apply to battery technologies. But, again, as part of a longer conversation about what it's going to take to hit 100% clean electricity, I think it's clear that, and I know California has already made some initial moves that we're watching closely to think about the role of longer duration and other types of energy storage technologies as well. I think 3,000 is really is going to be a relatively modest goal, I think. I predict, when we end up looking back at this, in 2030 or 2040.
Good. Well, thank you very much. We got a lot of questions. We're not going to be able to get to them. We will share all the questions with our speakers, and we'll find a way to share with everybody who signed up for this webinar. I'll give you a sense of the flavor of some of the questions that came in. But we're now going to switch to a third presentation, and I'm going to be the one giving this one, and it's going to focus on the topic of 100% clean energy states and the 100% clean energy collaborative. This is going to be a presentation in two parts, and both parts have the same premise. That premise is that states' adoption of 100% clean energy goals has likely been the most important positive policy development related to climate change in the past few years. It's essential that the states succeed in achieving their goals. Now, the first part of this presentation will look at the promise and perils of state 100% clean energy goals. The second part will explain how the 100% clean energy collaborative is a strategy for avoiding the perils. So there are 14 states plus the District of Columbia, which have established goals for 100% clean energy in the electricity sector. David showed you a map with those states on it. Those states cover 26% of U.S. power demand as measured by electricity sales. You can see a list on the right of the states. 10 of them have goals that have been established through legislation. In a couple of cases, it started with an executive order, but now it's established in legislation in all 10 cases. In 5 states, the governor issued an executive order. The definition of clean energy varies. In some cases, it's restricted to renewable energy. In other cases, it includes nuclear power and/or carbon capture and storage. Now, here's the 9 states plus the District of Columbia that have established 100% goals through legislation. This chart is up on our website, CESA.org, on the page for the 100% Clean Energy Collaborative. The first one to do it was Hawaii in 2016. The most recent one was Virginia, which passed legislation just a couple months ago. And you could get a sense of some of the ways these have been codified and some of the actions going on related to them. Here are the 5 states that have had goals established through executive order. Actually, in the case of Massachusetts, it's slightly different. There, the goal was established by Governor Charlie Baker in his 2020 State of the States address. So I want to talk about the risk of these goals, because the states were bold and brave to adopt the goals, but it's easier to adopt a goal than to achieve it. All the states are working diligently, but that doesn't mean it will be guaranteed. No one wants the high point of a state 100% initiative to be the day the press release was issued announcing it. Now, there are many challenges that the states will have to overcome to achieve their goals. Those challenges are technical, economic, policy, political, and educational. We should do everything we can to address those challenges and to show meaningful near-term progress is happening, because we don't want there to be disillusionment. We don't want any of the states to pull back from their ambitious goals. On top of that, 14 states plus DC is great, but it's not enough. We need additional states to adopt similar goals. That's going to be unlikely to happen if the early adopter states seem to be stalling out or losing focus. If the early adopters show that meaningful progress is possible, it's going to build momentum and it's going to create hope at a time when optimism is in short supply. So how does the 100% Clean Energy Collaborative fit in this? In general, the purpose is to help the states achieve their 100% goals. I want to make clear that we know that the collaborative's not a silver bullet. It's one of many strategies that are needed to make significant progress in achieving 100% clean energy. Where we fit in is to make it easier for the states to work cooperatively rather than in isolation. Our nation's federal system, which allows each state to develop its own policies and adopt solutions matched to its own needs, leads to considerable innovation and nuanced state-appropriate policies. That's what Louis Brandeis meant when he called the states laboratories of democracy. But when states have similar goals, it's important that they know what each other's doing. They need to do that to avoid reinventing the wheel or having each independently gathering the same information and repetitively tackling the same issues. Without a forum like the collaborative, it's difficult for the states to learn what's going on in the other states that are seeking to achieve 100%. The collaborative creates an easy, efficient way for them to learn from the experiences of their colleagues. More specifically, with a long-term multidimensional challenge a challenge such as achieving 100% clean electricity, it could be possible for an individual state acting in isolation to give insufficient attention to some relatively less obvious but nevertheless important aspect of the problem. Multi-state discussions will seek to identify the many possible potential challenges to achieving 100% clean energy, and will identify which of those challenges need to be addressed in the near term. Now, there are many useful organizations that enable cooperation among states on energy, but there needs to be a forum for the states that's focused exclusively on the 100% challenge. The collaborative was launched at the urging of some of the states. It actually started when Commissioner Hochschild came to CESA and said, can CESA sort of just collect information on which states have which goals and share that with the others? When we then talked about that with our board, some of our board members representing different states, including New York and California, said we needed to do more than that. We needed to start what became the 100% Clean Energy Collaborative. The agenda and the activities for the collaborative are not going to be shaped by CESA. They will be shaped by the participating states. We have an advisory committee composed of people from many of the clean energy states, plus a couple of other clean energy experts. Will also be conferring with representatives of all the states that have adopted 100% clean energy goals. We are not the only organization that's keeping track of what's going on in the wonderful world of 100% clean energy. We're going to focus our efforts on what's going on at the state level, but there are other organizations that are also tracking that. The U.S. Climate Alliance, for example, was started by and works with governors seeking to advance the Paris Agreement. It tracks policies across sectors, and it has a working group focused on the power sector. The UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation has been tracking 100% clean energy policies, and they produced a very useful report last November that looks at what goals have been established by various cities and states across the country. Environment America has an advocacy campaign, a campaign to encourage states to adopt 100% renewable energy. And as part of that, they monitor what's going on and produce a periodic newsletter. At the municipality level, the American Cities Climate Challenge, which was an initiative funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies and involving quite a few NGOs, they provide analysis and service to cities. And as part of that, they track which cities have established 100% clean energy goals. Sierra Club does something similar with its Mayors for Clean Energy campaign, and you could read about that by going to their website. In terms of the private sector, EPA's Green Power Partnership lists companies that purchase green power equivalent to 100% of their total electricity usage. Ceres and the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance track business commitments to climate change, including commitments to securing 100% of their electricity from clean sources. So all of these organizations are keeping track of some of the pieces moving towards clean energy. But there we go. My slides were not moving so fast, but now we're here. What we're going to be doing specifically through the Clean Energy Collaborative is that we're going to be facilitating meetings and discussions among states, and we're going to be doing that in a setting where participants can speak candidly about their challenges and lessons learned. We'll keep the states and other stakeholders informed about what's going on across the country related to states' 100% clean energy goals. We'll do that through a newsletter. webinars, blogs, and other publications, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We'll package information in ways that make it easy for state officials and for others to get useful information. We'll surface the state's analytical needs and identify those questions that are of interest to multiple states. We'll then seek to work with organizations that are engaged in electricity sector analysis to answer those questions. We think by figuring out which are the things that are of interest to several states, it'll be more likely that we can get answers to those questions. We'll present the state of debates in the analytical community so that the states can understand the different points of view within those debates, understand the arguments for each of those points of view. For example, one question we'll be looking at, which are the most effective, least costly ways to achieve reliability in a 100% clean energy electricity system? We'll identify best practices and will provide technical assistance to states. So we've been talking with the states about what they want us to do and what topics to focus on, and we've identified several initial discussion topics among the states. One, not surprisingly, has to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. We're going to be having discussions among the states about what are the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on their state 100% clean energy efforts, and how can clean energy initiatives aid in the economic recovery from the pandemic. As Alicia was talking about before, equity is a very important topic and one that a number of states have surfaced as important to consider. How can state initiatives for 100% clean energy reduce inequality rather than exacerbate it? And how do we move towards 100% clean energy most cost effectively? Those are a few of our initial topics for discussion. Let me go. I was having problems moving the slides, but now we're there. We're also going to have a variety of activities for wider audiences. One is a newsletter. It's going to come out most months, and it will focus in great part on what's going on at the state level with 100% clean energy efforts. We'll also feature publications and resources that come out that will be of interest to states that are pursuing 100% clean energy. Some of the initial publications we're looking to produce, one is case studies of specific state strategies for moving towards 100% clean energy. Another is a summary of different state decarbonization planning with an identification of common themes among what those different state planning efforts are doing. And a third is an annual report summarizing the progress and status of states' 100% clean energy efforts. In terms of the webinars we do, they'll primarily be of two types. The first type is presentations from states that have produced plans. The first webinar of that type we're going to do is the New Jersey Energy Master Plan, Pathway to 2050. Representatives of the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities are going to present about that in a webinar this summer. The second type of webinar we're going to do is presentations from leading researchers and experts talking about their research and their perspective on how to move towards clean energy. And the first webinar of that type we're going to be doing will be on May 15th. That's just this week. You still can sign up for it. And it's going to be a presentation by Professor Jesse Jenkins of Princeton University on decarbonizing electricity, the critical role of firm, low carbon resources. We're very interested in your input and ideas for what we can do through this collaborative to work with the states and move things forward. So send your ideas, and now we could turn to some of your questions. And let me turn it over to Samantha Donalds, who's going to ask them.
Great, thank you very much, Warren. So we did get a lot of questions coming in. The first one is about the webinar on Friday. So this person asked, CESA is holding a webinar this Friday on the role of firm carbon-free resources. What role do you see those resources playing in meeting 100% clean energy requirements?
Well, you know, rather than give my point of view on that, I think you should listen to the webinar on Friday, hear Professor Jenkins' point of view. We're going to hear from others. You know, really the role for CESA on this is not to tell the states how to achieve 100% clean energy. Our role is to create the forum for exchanging different points of view, serving as an honest broker rather than an advocate for just one approach rather than another.
Great. Okay, so here is another question. This person says, we applaud CESA and the participating states for establishing the Clean Energy Collaborative. We think one of its priorities should be helping to build consistency among states and how they account for and track clean energy in both source-based and load-based programs so that states and regions can meet their goals. How and when will the collaborative set its priorities, and will helping to harmonize accounting be one of them?
Well, we're at an early stage of this effort. We're going to have to see how high that ranks on the list of what the states want to do and how quickly we get to it. One thing I would say is the summary report, we were talking about producing an annual report talking about the status of the state's efforts. That will be a forum in which we could at least identify, here's how each state is accounting for their clean energy efforts and how they're tracking things. And after we've sort of figured out what all the states are doing, then we could have discussions among the states as to whether it makes sense for them to move towards greater harmonization.
Okay, great. Here's another interesting question. This person asks, how do we foster collaboration between states within RTOs, such as PJM?
Well, there are some of those efforts already, and there are, you know, it's closer or looser depending on the RTO. For example, in the Northeast under New England ISO, there's a lot of close collaboration among the states in that region. There are discussions through NARUC and through PJM itself among the states in that region. You know, it's a little different than what we're trying to do with the 100% Clean Energy Collaborative. We're trying to move beyond some of the day-to-day cooperative activities that states engage in to move forward clean energy on a short-term basis to help the states from across the country think about the much bigger, longer-term goals so that while they're trying to make incremental progress this year, and this year, they're also always keeping the bigger 100% long-term goal in mind and have a sense of what they need to do in the near term to make sure we don't wake up one morning and discover that, oh, we had these big 100% goals, but we'll never make it because we didn't have a good path and trajectory for getting there.
Great. Well, let's do one more question and then we'll wrap it up. So this person writes, it doesn't sound like you'll be engaging in regulatory or legislative advocacy to ensure successful implementation of 100% clean energy goals. How will you engage with NGO stakeholders who do engage in that kind of advocacy?
Well, yes, you're right. We're not going to be doing that. in part, again, CESA's role is to be an honest broker, creating a forum for the states to discuss things with each other. The way in which we will engage with those groups who advocate for positions before regulatory bodies and before legislatures is that when there's an issue that is of interest to the states that are exploring 100% clean energy, we will create, like we're doing with Professor Jenkins on Friday and like we'll do in both discussions among the states themselves and in other settings, will create opportunities for advocates to present their point of view on an issue of importance.
Great. Well, thanks, Warren, and thank you to our other speakers for their excellent presentations. It's 4 o'clock Eastern now, so I think we need to wrap it up. Warren, do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
My closing thought is the same as my initial thought. There's been nothing that's happened in the clean energy space over the past few years that's more important when you're thinking about the big long-term picture of climate change action. There's been nothing more important than states adopting 100% clean energy. It's to all of our advantages to help those states actually succeed in reaching the goals that they've set out. And we're going to do our part at the Clean Energy States Alliance, and I'd like to encourage all of the rest of you to help in any way you can. So thanks for listening today, and thanks for your interest in 100% clean energy.
Thank you, Warren, and thanks to everybody who attended, as Warren said. I'd also, before you sign out, I'd like to let you know that we do have a number of webinars coming up, including the webinar on Friday that we had mentioned previously that is being hosted by the 100% Clean Energy Collaborative. That's this Friday. It's called Decarbonizing Electricity, the Critical Role of Firm Low-Carbon Resources. And then we have some other webinars coming up later in the month. All of these webinars are free and open to the public. We encourage you to attend. You can read more and register on our website at cesa.org/webinars. So we hope to see you there. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.